And you were listening to season 6 of the award-winning Christian Outdoors podcast with your host, Pete Rogers. All right, everyone. As I said in the introduction, today I have with me Michael Tison, who is well known for his wild game speaking ministry that he has, something that I share a passion for as well, which many of the listeners know about. But Michael, thank you for joining me here on the show. Why don't you tell the listeners about yourself, and then we'll get going to the details.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. It's an honor and privilege to be here, and yeah, I've been a national wild game speaker since 2004, and that's where my passion and my heartbeat is to be able to go to outdoorsmen and share the gospel. Um, but it's kind of a crazy story how it all came together. But in the meantime, my speaking isn't full time to where I can do that. So I'm also a part time collegiate chaplain. I work with a couple universities in Southeast Michigan. And then I'm also on staff with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And I am launching FCA Outdoors in Michigan. And so I'm going to be working as an area rep in Michigan for FCA Outdoors. And then I also pastor a small church north of Imlay City, Michigan, in my part time. And somehow I don't know how it all works, but I'm able to pull it all together.
So you have 4 part-time jobs.
Yeah, pretty much. Yes. Yeah.
That's a bivocational vocation. It's a
Yeah. Yeah.
quad vocational vocation.
Yeah.
How about
Somehow financially it works out and everything just comes together.
yeah,
But it's really nice because God has given me flexibility to be able to handle all of these. Every one of my jobs has a little bit of flexibility built into it to where I can shift my times and I can go and do the things I need to accomplish. So it's been really a blessing.
right, right. Because we know as speakers at these sportsman's banquet, wild games, suppers, whatever they want to call them, they're usually on Saturdays, sometimes on Fridays, and so we have to travel to those, and sometimes it's a long way. The one I'm going to in Pennsylvania is 14-hour trip drive, and so that's leave 2 days early and get home 2 days afterwards. So
Mhm.
you're gone a lot. But if you didn't have other jobs that allowed you that flexibility, then it'd be really hard to do those things.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm getting ready here in just another week and a half or so. I'm heading south. I've got four speaking gigs in Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, and so I call it the Mike Tyson U.S. tour. But
Yeah.
my wife and I are grabbing our fifth wheel trailer, and they all line up perfectly. So we're gonna just travel, head south, get a little bit of warmer weather, and just be able to speak. But you're right, there's a lot of travel involved. I try to drive whenever I can because I love to see the outdoors and
Me too.
see
Yeah.
the God's creation, and I can save a little bit of money for my host, so they don't have to fly me out. Um, but yeah, it's a fun and exciting time, and man, nothing better than be able to share the gospel with a bunch of hunters and fishermen and outdoorsmen, and just that, man, it's a great experience. But I never thought God would pull me into it. That's for sure.
Right. Right. So how did all that come about, Michael?
Well, I can back up a little bit. In high school, all my speeches were memorable, but for all the wrong reasons. And my speech teacher told me I'd never be a public speaker, so don't even worry about it. And so in 2003, I was in the corporate world doing computer consulting, project management, um, and just kind of climbing the corporate ladder, doing really well. And I just kind of had come off kind of a little bit of a dark period in my life where I was starting to stray and do some things that I shouldn't. But luckily, God protected me from myself. And after I got through that, um, I was just praying and I was like, Lord, man, thank you for your forgiveness. Thank you for how you work in these kind of situations. But I'm like, man, if a guy like me could almost slip through the cracks, having grown up in the church and been saved at a young age and stuff. How many more men are almost slipping through the cracks as well? And so in 2003, I felt God calling me to start a Christian outdoor adventure ministry. So I left the corporate world behind and I started this adventure ministry, and we take people hiking the Grand Canyon, whitewater rafting, splunking, hiking, kayaking, and just try to pour into them from a discipleship standpoint, using God's creation, to get them out there. Because I found that when I took guys hiking, they would open up and share in ways that they wouldn't open up in church. And once I started realizing that, I'm like, man, there is so much power in being in the outdoors and being in God's creation. So I took the leap of faith. I started this outdoor ministry. In that same year, I ended up shooting this big 8-point buck right here behind me. I only had 2 arrows with me, but it took me 4 shots. And it's kind of a comical, funny story how I got that. But I use it in my speaking ministry as well. And I share that story. And I ask people, what are you chasing? And and then I tell another story where I was out in Colorado. I was elk hunting, came down with a serious case of food poisoning, but I ended up shooting a bull elk. And then I got lost in the mountains of Colorado. So I go through in my presentation, I go through the 5 stages people go through when they're lost in the wilderness. And so I go through those stages. And then stage 5 is resignation. You resign yourself to the fact that you are lost, and it's not going to be any effort on your part to save you. It's going to take the effort of somebody else to come and rescue you. And then that leads into the gospel message for me and my presentation and stuff. And so I ended up, when I shot this buck, I remember praying in the woods, thanking God for the harvest and allowing me to shoot the biggest buck I've shot so far in my life. And I said, Lord, just use this deer however you would. And boy, man, did I not expect him to do anything, because shortly after that, I call up this taxidermist and I said, hey, I want to get this deer mounted, but I have no money because I just started this outdoor ministry. And he's like, well, tell me more about the outdoor ministry. And so I did. And after a few minutes, he's like, all right, this is what I'm going to do, Mike. I'm going to mount the deer for free. All I ask is you come to our church wild game dinner and give a 5-minute testimony. I'm like, shoot, I can give a 5-minute testimony for a free deer mount. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So I get there and I'm on my way there, and I've convinced myself it's a small church. Everybody's going to be over the age of 70. So they're going to treat you like grandpa and grandma if you make mistakes. I'm only giving a 5-minute testimony, so no big deal. And I get to this church. It's a big church. There's 400 men at this wild game event. And he hands me the agenda for the night, and I read down through it, and it's like meal, DNR presentation, prize drawing, keynote speaker, Mike Tison. And I look at it, I'm like, his name was Pat. I was like, Pat, what are you doing? You just said it was a 5-minute testimony. He said, yeah, I know. I just told you that because I knew you wouldn't come. And I'm like, dude, I've got no message. And it was just it was amazing. The prize drawing went really long. The meal took forever. The DNR guy was really boring. And after this 45 minutes of prize drawing, the last prize is drawn, and you could hear 400 metal chairs all wanting to get out of there. They're scooting backwards. The MC runs up on stage. Hold on. We still have our keynote speaker. And you could hear everybody in the room go,
When did
and
this go?
so that's
Yeah.
how my speaking ministry was born. I had a hostile crowd. I had no message. And God's like, look at what I'm going to do for you. And I was like, so
Yeah.
it took me a lot of years to really grasp that I was qualified. I didn't feel qualified. I'm like, who wants to hear me speak? Um, but I didn't realize that God had equipped me for it. And so it's been a great journey, and I've been doing it since 2004. And oh man, God's just really has taught me a lot, as I've been able to share the gospel and encourage believers and just get to hang out with people in the outdoors. It's been awesome.
How many events a year do you do now? Does it vary? 'Cause mine
It,
varies year to year.
yeah, it varies. I mean, I've had some years where I've only had, 2 or 3 gigs, and then I've had years where I've had 10 to 12. The season, as you know, is typically January to about April, and
Mhm.
all of the key weekends in there are usually pretty popular. Um, besides myself and you, and I've got some other guys, Chad and James Hampton, and I know Jeff Denker, and there's a bunch of other guys out there that are on the wild game circuit, and so we kind of split up a bunch of them, and so sometimes they're always looking for a new face. So I'm
Right,
always recommending guys to speak after I speak, but I
right,
only recommend guys that I know are going to share the gospel.
right,
There,
right,
there's some wild game speakers out there that are knowledgeable about what they're talking about, but I just feel like it's a missed opportunity. You got 400, 700 men, 100 guys in a room, and you're the speaker. You've got them hooked, and then to not give the gospel in those situations is so I'm always trying to refer guys that I know
right,
that
right,
they're are excellent at their craft, but can also communicate the gospel as well.
right. Have you noticed, as I have the last couple of years, Michael, that more and more of these are no longer men only, but they're family events?
Oh yeah, yeah. A lot of my events are family oriented.
Hmm.
Sometimes a lot of kids running around. I remember I was at a small event, and there was about 50, 60 people in the room, and most of them were older. And after the food, they were already in food comas. They're about ready to fall asleep. And this little girl's tap dancing while I'm speaking. And it was a crazy experience. But yeah, no, a lot of them are family oriented. And, percentage wise, it's probably 85 to 90% men in the room.
Right, right.
But there's about, a good 10, 15% women that, are avid hunters, and then the young boys and stuff. And I'm a storyteller.
Yeah.
And so my stories, I use my stories to bring out spiritual truths to lead to the gospel.
Hmm.
So the first
Right.
story, um, the Chase 8, where that came from was from this buck. And so the idea is that I was so consumed with chasing after the material aspects of this buck, the big antlers, the 200-pound body, and I lost focus. And so I share that even in life, when we lose focus on what God has called us to, even under perfect conditions, it was perfect conditions to bag this buck. The rut was in full gear. Just it was an excellent time to hunt. But when you lose focus, even under perfect conditions, your world can fall apart like that.
Hmm.
And so I share that kind of a message with them using that story, and ask them, what are they chasing in life? Because life is short, and we can chase after all these worldly things, but in the end, they don't mean anything. And
Right.
a lot of times as hunters, we're out there hunting 100 days in a row, and meanwhile we're neglecting our family, and neglecting a relationship with God. And
Hmm.
so I use that story to
Hmm.
set up the lost in the mountains story, and to
Right.
get them thinking.
Right. And it's I think being a good storyteller is crucial to those events. And I tell stories myself, even in the pulpit when I'm preaching. I just like the use of relevant stories to connect things. But yeah, when you do the family event, to me, it's very different than a men only event. Had completely different message, completely different approach, because it's man to man versus man to family, and so I think anybody who's planning on having one of these events needs to keep that in mind. That some speakers are better for man to man. They're really just do men events only, and others are can do both. Like you and I do. We do both family events and men only events. And I gotta say, and this may hurt me, but I enjoy the man events because I feel a little called towards more of a men's ministry, as if there's not enough out there. But wherever God leads me is where we go, right? Right.
Yeah, yeah. My life verse is Proverbs 16:9, and it says, "In his heart, man plans his way or plans his course, but the Lord establishes his steps." And when I started that outdoor adventure ministry, I had no idea that where God would take me with it. You know,
Hmm.
I had aspirations that the outdoor adventure part of it would be national, and that I'd be able to reach men, around the country,
Hmm.
through outdoors and in God's creation. But little did I know that that would only last a few years, and God would shut that door. But that He had me in the outdoor world, and that what would go national was my speaking.
Hmm.
And it just blows my mind because I never would have signed up to be a public speaker, not at all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't it, it's not true that God tricks you or anything like that, but God used a crazy taxidermist, this deer, to get me into something that I never would have approached and never would have thought that I was qualified to do.
Mm.
So when after that event, I'm like, all right, Lord, I just had this feeling inside me like, man, this is awesome. I To be able to share the gospel and to do this. I don't know how to do this. So I
Mhm.
better learn. So I started I watched Ken Davis videos. He's a Christian comedian
Mhm.
on communication and how to have eye contact and pacing and different things. I even took stand up comedy classes and did stand up comedy just so I could incorporate humor into
Oh
my
my gosh.
presentations.
I would never have the courage to do that. That can be pretty funny, but I would never have the courage to
Oh,
stand up and do an open mic at a comedy club. I would no. I cannot imagine the
I
fear.
recommend it. I recommend it. It is the scariest thing in the world, but it really helps you as a speaker. It really does. And because people don't realize with comedy, there's a lot of technique involved. People just
Oh,
think,
yeah.
oh, he's funny. He just, a lot of the guys that are funny are not good stand-up comics,
Right.
because there's actually technique involved in it, and they set things up, and it was a lot of fun, and
Yeah.
but it
Well,
really just
it's
kind of
more than
prepared.
just writing a good joke. It's how do you present the joke and how do you transition to the next one
Yeah,
and how do you build up to the punchline and timing of all that, when to pause, when not to pause, and how to
yeah,
I mean, there's so much more involved, and the amount of memorization they do. Oh my goodness. You watch an hour and a half, comedies, which I love to watch stand-up I watch dry bar comedy a lot, and because it's clean comedy, and I'm just amazed that they can memorize this. Of course, they do it over and over and over,
yeah.
but if they're like say at a club or at a comedy house for 3 or 4 nights, they're doing different sets every night because the same people may come back. And how do you memorize all that? And then I think that's kind of what I do when I preach, though. I get it pretty well memorized and, you know, go from there. But yeah, I just can't imagine. I just couldn't. And I love in-person speaking. Of course, I do 90% of mine behind this microphone, when we're reaching a little over 6 million people, but speaking live in front of 10,000 doesn't bother me. But if I had to get up there and make them laugh, oh, as soon as they didn't, I would collapse. I would probably pass out when I think this is funny and nobody else does. You don't even get a snicker. I know I would probably pass out right there.
Well, I
Uh,
know I know in my family, I think I'm hilarious all the time, but my family members don't think I'm funny, but I think I'm funny.
I think I'm funny too. Yeah, I do too. But I don't know that I could do a 10-minute set of being funny, back to
Yeah.
back to back to back to back. And that it amazes me how good they are at that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it is important when you're speaking to I think, um, to add some humor to it, to lighten the atmosphere, and to make it more real, and kind of get your audience engaged. By adding some humor to it, as well as, because if we just keep pounding them with heavy stuff, after a while they get tired of it. So you got to
Yeah.
move their emotions back and forth throughout the entire hour. That's usually what I speak at these events, is between 45 minutes and an hour. And
Yes.
yeah, go
Same,
ahead.
same here. My style, I've always, I think it's just the way maybe God has gifted me or whatever with the storytelling. But I think for wild game dinners, to be a storyteller is an excellent match for the family part of it, the men part of it,
Mhm.
because my style, how it works really well is I do add humor into my presentation, but I'm telling stories. I'm not coming with fire and brimstone. I'm not coming, with a heavy Sunday morning, preaching sermon series or something. I'm taking hunting and outdoor stories and I'm pulling out those spiritual truths of like when I was chasing after that buck and I lost focus and what are we chasing, right? And then being lost in the mountains, you go through those 5 stages and able to pull that out and so these guys don't feel like it's like a bait and switch type of a thing where, oh, now I'm at church all of a sudden or whatever. And so the presentation, at least my style, I think has worked really well. People have always said, you're down to earth, you're relatable, but you didn't come across as preachy, but you were very clear in your gospel presentation
Mhm.
and everything just led right up to it. And I don't say that in a way to pat myself on the back because God is the one that gave me these stories.
Right.
And like I said, I never set out to do it. So I'm just like in life, right? The Christian faith is really just telling people about your story and using your story to show others that God has been really good to you and God has done amazing things and why
Mhm.
you can have hope and peace in this dark world because of your relationship with Christ. But it's easy. You don't have to be, have a master's in theological studies and be ordained to share your story of how God is working in your life. And that's kind of the approach I take with my wild game presentations.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's good that we have a variety of people that do this, because I do it, and my style is a little bit different from yours, and your style is different from Jeff's, and Jeff Danker's been on the show,
Yeah. Yeah.
and different from Brad Clay from Final Descent Outdoors, and we're all a little bit different, but we always bring the same thing, and it's important. And I like how you said this early on, Michael. So I'm gonna go back to when you said that I'm going to share the gospel message. And I've learned that when somebody reaches out and says you want to speak at the wild game dinner, I've learned the hard way to convey that up front. Do you want an entertainer, or do you want somebody to share the gospel message? Because I'm going to share the gospel message. I'm going to challenge people to make a decision. I'm going to encourage people to enter into a relationship with Christ, either rededicate their lives or do it for the first time. If that's not what you want, I'm not your guy. And I've had churches say, we're really just looking for an entertainer, somebody to just entertain us, and the pastor will do that part. I'm like, okay, well, cool. I'm not your guy. Here's some people I can recommend. But more often than not, the churches, that's what we're about. That's what we want. We want somebody different to come in, share the gospel, tell good stories, be entertaining and convicting, and um, encourage the people to make some kind of decision. And it's also important, if you're listening to this and you're thinking about having one, or are having one, it's important for you, the host church, to follow up with these people that make decisions,
Yeah. Yeah.
because we can't. Mike and I go home the next day, usually, sometimes at night, but it's really important for you to follow up with these people and know John and Sue and Billy and Beth, and these people made a decision for Christ, and they're in your community, and you need to follow up with them as the deacons, elders, pastor, whoever it is that whoever your team is, to make sure that you follow through and then disciple them into that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you said that, Pete. Because yeah, that is a concern of mine. I get to share the gospel, and it's like, but who's going to disciple these guys, right? Do they really understand the steps that they've made?
Mhm.
But when you were saying that, it also popped something into my head that I say to all the hosts that bring me in to speak. I always ask them this question because a lot of times, I don't know for the audience out there, but putting on a wild game event is a lot of work. And these churches who are putting them on have a lot of people that are in the background that are slaving away for a couple of days, getting food ready and setting everything up. And there's a lot of work. And I have a lot of churches who've been doing it for 10 or 15 years say, Mike, this might be our last time we do this. And I always ask them, I say, hold on, before you stop doing this, let me ask you one question. And that question is, what percentage of the community is coming to your event that you would consider maybe lost or just from the community that's coming to this wild game event? And the answers I always get is minimal 25% to 60%. So then I turn to them and I say, okay, so you're telling me you get 25 to 60% of the people in attendance are from your community that are coming to this event. Name me one other event in your church that even gets 10%
Mm-hmm.
to come.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's true, then why aren't you making this event bigger and better every year? Give,
Absolutely.
give away more guns or whatever you got to do to make it just an exciting event,
Yeah.
because it's a huge opportunity. And I'm like you, I'm going to share the gospel. It's a missed opportunity if we don't.
Right. Right.
You know.
Yeah. But I've been to some that were, 400, 500 people, men, and I've uh, gone to some where only 30 people showed up. And usually when it's the latter, it's because they didn't promote it, they didn't tell people about it, and they were not excited about having it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And you're right, it does take a lot of work. It takes a lot of commitment from usually the ones I've been a part of. It's their men's team that does it.
Yeah.
They're the ones who do the grilling and frying their alligator and donating their venison and I did one in Tennessee last year. It was so cool. We had so much variety of wild game. We had frog legs and alligator and turkey breast and venison and quail eggs. And I mean, it was like, this is awesome. I hope y'all invite me back. And said, well, we get a different person every year. We'll wait every other year and then you can come back again. I said, oh, I was so full before the meal from snacking by the guys out there cooking. I didn't even have to eat my meal, but it was, and then other ones, they just bring in chicken from Publix
Yeah.
and that's fine too.
Yeah.
That's fine too.
Yeah. I've experienced the same kind of things. People have done a traditional turkey Thanksgiving type of a dinner,
Mm,
to everything from wild boar to bear to moose to
yeah,
alligator, snake,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
And I made a mistake on my very first one, which I didn't expect to be a speaker, but they had everything you could think of. And man, I was picking out on these spicy bear meatballs, and then I get up on stage and I learned I can't eat at these events because man, I was belching about every 30 seconds, and I just had to make jokes about being at deer camp.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so that's
yeah.
the thing I don't like about these wild game dinners is the food is so good and I can't really enjoy it because it's
We
always
got to be
before
on
I
in
go
just a
on
minute. Yeah,
stage. Right?
we got to be on in just a minute. Yeah,
Yeah.
and also, I always tell people if y'all have prizes that you're giving away, save the 3 big prizes till after I speak.
Yep.
That way
Yep.
people won't leave. You can do some of the smaller prizes, but then when you get to the bigger items, save those because they will wait. They've already bought their raffle tickets or they got their free door prize tickets, whatever it is, whether you sell them or not. But save the big ones to the end so that people will stay for the message because when they don't, a third of the people leave.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
No, you're
do.
absolutely right.
Yeah, a third of the people will leave if you don't save some of the door prizes or raffle prizes, whatever your church does, until
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I encourage churches to actually do a response card and
Yes.
give them 3 or 4 options. I accepted Christ. I want to know more about the church. Don't bother me. Um, you know,
Yeah.
I want more information, right? So you have a response card, and I always tell churches make that response card the ticket for the grand prize.
Hmm.
So now, after I speak, they can fill that out, collect them, and then you draw that out for the grand prize.
Right.
Now you've got information to help with that discipleship and that follow up. You're
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, this guy made a decision, and
I
it's
have his name and his address and his phone
yeah,
number, and now I know
yeah,
where to go. And I have done events that did that, and it's amazing because we know that a lot of the people don't handle peer pressure well. And even when we do an altar call or we ask people to make a decision, they may make the decision in their seat, but they're not comfortable getting up and walking down the aisle. But with
right,
that card, they can check, I made a decision for Christ, and they'll put comments down. And then you can collect it and say, oh wow, Billy Smith accepted Christ today. I know where he lives. I'm gonna go see him tomorrow.
yeah, yeah,
And for the pastors out there, excuse me, the pastors out there listening to this, statistics say that if somebody makes a decision for Christ at church on Sunday morning, or if they're visiting your church, if you wait 72 hours before you contact them or longer, you've lost them.
mm,
If you can make contact within the first 24 hours, you have like a 89% chance of them coming back to your church and getting involved. If you wait 48, it drops down to like 30%. 72, you don't care about me.
mm,
So don't put it off, and it's not hard. In
yeah,
today's technology, you got their phone number.
right,
Hey, Billy Smith, I see that you made it. Thanks for coming to our event. We see the minute. I'd like to come by and see you when it's a good time. Boom, you've made a contact. That's very important. It's very important. Um, Go ahead.
no, I'm good.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something. I thought you were- Uh, um, Tell us about just so on your website you have escapes and pursuits, missions, and stuff. But tell us about some of these other things that you have going on, if you do.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting, right? So my speaking ministry is actually at Tison.life, Tison.life is kind of my main speaking website. And so over the years when I was speaking, um, I wanted to have some good merchandise, and I was trying to um, because people want to buy sweatshirts or they buy my books at my speaking gigs and stuff like that. And so over the years, it took a while, but I came up with the Chase 8 brand. And so the bars and stripes represent the 4 arrows that I shot at this buck, and, just the Chase 8. So I came up with the brand of chase8.com, being kind of the outdoor ministry and kind of getting back into not hiking the Grand Canyon stuff anymore, but maybe doing some sporting clay shoots and different things like that. So I have my speaking website at Tison.life, and then chase8.com is kind of my outdoor brand. And and then with me now being a part-time FCA outdoors guy in Michigan, I'm going to be combining Chase 8 with FCA Outdoors to do some wilderness retreats. some sporting clay shoots. I've got just a what I call winter fire, a big bonfire event that's coming up tomorrow for a bunch of guys in the Michigan area to pull them together, to challenge them in their faith, but to say, look, you love the outdoors, you love Christ, you want to see the next generation reach for Christ. Let me tell you how you can use outdoor ministry. Use your passion, something you're passionate about, fishing or hunting, and to
Mhm.
be able to go into the schools or be able to reach the next generation or even just to reach some adults in an area that you are passionate about. Because I know that when I go to these wild game dinners, and let's say there's 400 men at this event, I gotta believe that there's at least 6 guys at that event that love the Lord, want to reach the next generation, have a passion for hunting, fishing, the outdoors, but they don't know where to serve. They don't know how they can use their giftings and their passions for ministry. And
Mhm.
I know there's a bunch of pastors that they don't know how to equip these guys because you can't do that kind of stuff in church, but you
Right.
can do it outside of church. It could be a win-win to where you're maybe leading a group of high schoolers from your local high school doing sporting clays or hiking or fishing, sharing the gospel, doing the FCA model, Fellowship Christian Athletes model of huddles. And I feel like it'd be a win-win for the church to be able to get guys to use their passions for the outdoors. And so Chase 8 is kind of that idea to where, I want to help train. I want to help talk to guys and say, look, use your passions for the outdoors and for the Lord. And here's how you can do it. This is how God has worked in my life. And
Mhm.
now it's kind of crazy. I'm kind of coming full circle through my whole testimony of how God's equipped me and kind of bringing me back around. It's been amazing, and it'd probably be another episode to share some of that stuff. But
Well, and there's so much opportunity is what I hear you saying, and missed opportunity that there's a lot of guys. Well, you see it in today's church. I'm gonna ramble a little bit if you don't mind. That when you look at a congregation on a Sunday morning, it's always more women than men.
Mhm.
Always, because there's a lot of women who go to church without their husband because he's on the lake fishing or he's out hunting or he's hanging with his buddies, getting ready for a ball game, whatever. But if we can reach the men with the gospel and get them to actually lead their family the way that God has called us to do as men, to be the spiritual leader and the emotional leader and the physical leader of your family, then it leaves a legacy that lasts generations. One of the things that I do when I'm speaking is I talk about when I'm speaking to men is I will say things like, how many of you would if somebody was hurting your child, how many of you would stop somebody from hurting your child? Of course, every man's hand goes up, right? It should, right? And say, okay, so you're protective of your child, of your children, and of your spouse, right? But what are you doing to protect their eternity? You're protecting their physicalness, making sure nobody's hurting them. You're protecting them by feeding them and putting clothes on their back and roof over their head. But what are you doing to protect their eternity? What have you done to make sure that they are in the family of God? And if you're not doing anything with that, then that needs to be your focus because, as the Bible tells us, all this other stuff is fleeting. The only thing that lasts forever is our souls. And when they're in communion with God in the fellowship of Christ, then they will live forever in heaven. And then you will never be apart from them. And they will then take their children and they will take their children. And that is the only legacy men need to worry about is my family in relationship with Christ. And we worry so much about protecting all these other things, but we don't protect their eternity. I've copywritten that, by the way. So just so you know, I'm just kidding.
Oh,
anything
that's great.
gets people in a relationship, man. And there's, I don't copyright hardly anything. There's a few things, but so it's very important that and if you're a single parent, you're a mom who doesn't have a man, you have to assume that role and make sure that you're doing all you can to provide for, but how are you providing for their eternity? Because that is the most important thing. It's the only thing I care about as a dad is, are my children in relationship with Christ? And all of them are. And that's the only thing I care about, and helping them to stay in that relationship as they help me. Because we all have these, cycles in our life.
Yeah.
It's very important to do that. Very important. So I want to jump on your bandwagon though and say, if you're a member of a church and you're listening to this and you haven't had a sportsman's banquet or a wild game dinner or whatever you want to call it, okay. Maybe you live in an urban area and there's not many hunters and fishermen and outdoor people in your, but there's something extracurricular that is unique to your area that you can say, hey, why don't we have a boom? Why don't we have a golf men's gathering? All the men in our church play golf, and not many hunters or fishermen, but we have a ton of golfers. Let's have a gathering of men, and we're going to have a golf centered what I'm looking for event.
Yeah.
Then giving away golf clubs and giving away Scotty Cameron putters and some Titleist Pro V1s and stuff like that. And then you have somebody, which I can do that too, by the way. I don't know if you can, but I play golf when my shoulder's not jacked up. But you can do it. It doesn't have to be a hunting and fishing wild game. It can be some type of event that attracts men in your community. And I say men because that tends to be our focus, to get them involved in church and to challenge them into a relationship with Christ.
Yeah. That's a great idea. I know if it was golfing for me, I would end up fishing more than I would be golfing,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Right.
chasing after my balls.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, no, you're right. It could be an event like that, or even just a men's gathering, to where you bring in somebody like us, to where, you give them kind of a manly kind of a message or something.
Right. Right. Yeah.
There's all sorts of ideas out there.
Yeah.
But you hit on a thing that made me think of, and I don't know what the stat is, but I've always heard that if you can get the men, you'll get the family.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you can reach and share the gospel and lead a man to the Lord,
Mm-hmm.
most of the time the wife and the kids will follow.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah,
that's
and that's the important thing as men is we are. I mean, the Bible is very clear about the role of dads and of husbands and of men in the New Testament, in Ephesians, and in even in Romans and in parts of the T books, Thessalonians and Timothy. Our role as men is to guide and to instruct and to teach our family, and we teach them by example and by words. And if we say you need to believe in Jesus, you need to believe in Jesus while we're watching the ball game and don't go to church, or we take them and drop them off at church, they're thinking, well, it's not important to Dad. Why is he dropping me off here? I remember growing up and way out in the country in Saluda County, South Carolina, there was the closest anybody my age was over 2 miles away, and he would not. They did not go to church, and he would not let his children play outside until after 12 when the churches got out, because he didn't want people seeing them playing outside while they were on their way to church. So they were not allowed to go outside until afternoon on Sunday, because then he felt like I can get away with it. I thought that is the oddest thing. If you know that much, then you need to have your butt in church.
right, right.
You know, and I've said this before too, Michael, is that there's a lot of people with church hurt out there. There's a lot of people with church hurt who they've gone to their local church and maybe they were treated poorly, or they felt like they were, or they were not received well, or you don't particularly care for that style of worship, or you don't feel like the pastor is teaching you anything. They just stop going. Well, my analogy is this: if you go out to Outback and they ruin your steak, do you stop eating steak?
Right.
No, you don't. What do? You go to Longhorn next time, or you go to Ruth Chris, which I can't afford, but you may can. Or you go to Ruth Chris, or you go to another Outback, and you try steak again. My point is there's churches everywhere and not every church will fit every person, but that should not stop you from going. Find another one. Find another one so that can get plugged in because we all need that body of Christ to help us to get better.
Mm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Amen.
Yep. Well, Michael, I think we've covered about everything. You have anything else that you want to add to the conversation?
Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just if anybody's out there and they want to learn outdoor ministry and they want to be able to get involved and maybe they've been out there and you're like, man, I've been passionate about the outdoors for so many years, but I just don't know how to do ministry with it. And reach out, talk to me, talk to Pete,
Mm-hmm.
talk to others. There's other guys out there that are doing it just as well as us,
Hmm.
and it's a great opportunity to do something you
Yeah.
love that'll have an eternal impact. And
Right.
so I don't know. I'm just super excited about what God is doing, and I see how He's moving in my life right now, keeping me in the outdoor world and making big ministry impact.
Mm.
There's times I didn't feel qualified, and then there were times where God allowed great ministry to happen through me, even when I was a train wreck. But
Mhm.
even those train wreck moments were moments to me that gave me freedom to realize that I didn't have to be perfect in my approach, perfect in my presentation. God is the one who's going to bring the harvest, anyways. And 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 7, 8, and 9 have really been on my heart lately. And I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit, but basically, verse 7 says that you are not lacking any gift. God has given you the spiritual gifts that you need and the skills and the abilities. And then verse 8 says that when you can't do it on your own, He will carry you, He will sustain you until the end. And this is all through the Lord Jesus Christ,
Mhm.
after each of these is said. And then verse 9, it says, He is faithful. And when He is faithful, He is trustworthy to do what He says He's going to do. And the Bible is filled with His promises. And so you're not lacking any gift. And I've finally realized that in my life that He's equipped me, and that when I can't do it and when I've been a train wreck, He's going to bring the harvest and He's going to carry me through that.
Mhm.
And He's faithful. And man, over the last 20 some years, even though I've doubted and I've feared and I've didn't feel qualified, man, God still used me and is still writing my story. And I'm still learning and I'm still growing. And but man, I'm at that point where it's just like, all right, Lord, just send me. I'll go.
Yep.
You know, give
Yeah.
me give me was it Elisha asked Elijah for a double portion?
Yeah.
Give I'll take a single portion of Billy Graham or a half a portion of Billy Graham or something, right? Just let's
Even
go.
that's a lot.
Yeah, let's go. I'll take it.
Right.
I'll take it.
Absolutely. Let's go. Let's go. And I want to add in closing, Michael, that if you are listening to this and you're thinking about a wild game dinner, a sportsman's banquet, or any of these events we talked about, and you don't know what to do, you can reach out to Michael. I'll have his email in the show notes, or to me, Pete at christianoutdoors.org. I'll put that in the show notes too. And we'll be glad to help you. We have done so many of these. We've seen just about everything that you can see in these events. And we'll be glad to help you, to give you ideas, to say, here's some things that have worked in the past that we've seen other churches do. You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
But we've also seen things that churches made mistakes in, and say you want to avoid some of these things, but these are some things that really work. And we'd be glad to help you with that. Either one of us would. So I'll put your email and my email in the show notes. So if you're thinking about doing this, reach out to us. We'll be glad to help you with it.
Yeah.
Michael Tison here with Chase 8 Ministries, a speaker for sportsman's banquets, wild game dinners, and other events across the country. Thank you for joining me here on Christian Outdoors.